Media recognition from Bloomberg, Reuters, recycling trade publications. Patented process for 100% recovery of critical metals, including cobalt, lithium, nickel, manganese, aluminum. American Manganese is focused on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. American Manganese trades on the TSX Venture, AMY, the US, AMYZF, and Frankfurt 2AM. For more information, visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
Welcome to the Goddard Report. Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is award-winning investigative reporter and publisher of the Breaker.News, Bob Mackin. Bob, welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
Bob, should kickboxing be legal in BC? Some people think it should, and efforts are underway. What can you tell us about it?
Well, professional kickboxing is now legal in British Columbia, as per the announcement yesterday by Tourism Minister Lisa Bear, who's also responsible for sport in British Columbia. She did have a junior minister who held the sport portfolio. That's Ravi Kahlon, who is now junior minister in the forest ministry. The forest industry needs some help right now. It's suffering, so John Horgan shuffled into that responsibility out of the tourism ministry, where he was the junior minister of sport. But it was up to Lisa Bear, who announced this on August 27th at the World Champion Club Gym at the south foot of number 5 Road in Richmond. I thought I'd go to this. I'm not a news conference hound, because often they're just staged events and you don't get much information out of them. I try to get the information behind the scenes, what really is going on in the minds of our politicians, public officials. But I had to go this one out of curiosity, because the World Champion Club is a place where some photos emerged recently in a global news report that showed Joe Pescasolido, the Richmond Trudeau Liberal MP, posing in one of the boxing rings with Tiger Wan, Rongchang Tiger Wan, who's a People's Liberation Army veteran who has a very large compound, a mysterious compound in Chilliwack. He owns a gun store in Coquitlam and multiple properties around Lower Mainland, including Richmond. And one of Tiger Wan's friends is Paul King Jin. That name may be familiar to you as essentially the poster child for the NDP government's anti-money laundering public inquiry that's coming up. Paul King Jin has had connections to the Silver International Underground Bank in Richmond, according to the RCMP. And the Silver International was the underground bank that was the subject of a massive RCMP investigation in 2015. It was supposed to go to court. Major trial was supposed to begin in January of this year, but last fall, the charges fell apart. The prosecution fell apart. Someone in the prosecution bungled the disclosures and gave away the name of an informant, among other things, in the documents that were received by the defense. So the case fell apart. The NDP government has proceeded, however, with lawsuits in BC Supreme Court through the Civil Forfeiture Office to seize assets, seize houses and cars, as well as seize cash and other items. And one of those lawsuits was filed back in March of this year against Paul King Jin, that alleged that he has a criminal past, and that he has been banned from BC casinos by BC Lottery Corporation, and that he was seen by the RCMP in 2015 shuttling large sums of money in cash bags between the Silver International office, his massage parlor called the Water Cube, several residences in Richmond. They say that he ran illegal gaming houses in Richmond, and say that he was involved in several hundred suspicious large transactions at casinos, including River Rock, in the tens of millions of dollars. That's all contained in the court pleadings at the end of July. Through his lawyer, Paul King Jin filed a defense statement to deny those allegations, said he's a hard-working guy who has been in Canada for more than a quarter of a century, who has cared for his family and made money, made a career lawfully and legitimately. His disputing all the charges against him and says that the RCP investigations against him and others and his family were in breach of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. We don't yet have a court date yet, but it should be very interesting. So at this news conference where Minister Lisa Bear was, I also talked with Paul King, and he was there. And didn't shy away from me, but just didn't really want to answer any questions about the allegations against him, the very serious allegations against him. I tried a couple of times to ask him about that. He basically said, in a nutshell, that he's a hard-working guy, he's innocent, and that he loves Canada, loves living in Canada. He's been here for 30 years, been very heavily involved in boxing, especially this gym, the number 5 Road in Richmond, the World Champion Club, and that he wants to teach younger kids how to reach their Olympic dreams. But he stressed he didn't really want to talk about any of the allegations against him, that he had advice from his lawyer not to. So then, before that, I did ask Minister Lisa Beer why they chose that location and whether there was any threat assessment done, because you'd think that our government would be sophisticated enough when it holds press conferences and photo ops, especially in private businesses, that it would do its due diligence to find out who will be there, who owns the facility, who owns the venue, just to make sure that there's no security risk, as well as make sure there's no reputational risk. And she seemed to be clueless, oblivious to the question about it. And I then informed her that the manager there was Paul King-Jen, who is a defendant in an action brought by her government, brought by the NDP government against him, with some very serious accusations that he is a central figure in what's gone on in Richmond at the casinos. And she said it was news to her about that, and she said that the Athletic Commission, the regulatory body for combat sports in BC, was the one that chose the venue. So I'm still waiting to hear from others in government. I've contacted people in the Premier's office, contacted people at the Government Communications Office at the highest levels to find out how this came to be, why this news conference was held at this location. They didn't have to hold this news conference. They could have just issued a news release, but no, they decided to do something visual and attract some TV and newspaper attention there. I went again because I was curious about this facility, which had some interesting people in there. And it's a going business, it appears, with an octagon for mixed martial arts and a boxing ring for boxing, as well as professional kickboxing now. So some very serious questions about this, because the anti-money laundering public inquiry is one of the biggest, most ambitious programs that Premier John Horgan has greenlit during his 2+ years in office. And there have been some accusations that this is just a witch hunt against the Liberals, but there is strong public support across party lines, according to various public opinion polls, that the Liberals, when they were in government, didn't do a good enough job to police the casinos, and a straight line can be drawn between the casino corruption and organized crime we see out in our streets, and the drug dealing. And Peter German, in his reports, has found that there is a connection to transnational money laundering. But it certainly doesn't look good for the NDP when one of their cabinet ministers is going to a news conference hosted at a venue that is managed by someone who is actually a target of the government's civil arm and was a target of the government's criminal investigative arm. Very, very unusual, and I'm hoping that the NDP government will explain a little more than this, because it just doesn't look good and doesn't smell good at all when you see something like this go down. Again, Paul King-Jen has expressed his defense statement in court. We don't have yet a court date, so the allegations against him haven't been proven in court. It'll be very interesting to hear the arguments one way or another when the court case actually does happen.
We'll have more with Bob Mackin when we return.
I'm Douglas Mason, CEO of Naturally Splendid, symbol NSP on the TSX Venture Exchange. Naturally Splendid is a biotechnology and consumer products company focused on the global cannabis and health markets. Naturally Splendid is expanding distribution in this rapidly growing market with products currently in Canada, the USA, South Korea, Germany, and Australia. to view our comprehensive company presentation, and for more information, please visit our website at naturallysplendid.com.
Cypress Development Corp. is developing a world-class lithium resource in the heart of Clayton Valley, Nevada. The size of the resource makes the Clayton Valley project a premier asset with the potential to impact the future of lithium supply. Cypress Development Corp. trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol CYP, the OTCQB, symbol CYDVF, and on Frankfurt, symbol C1Z1. For more information, please visit our website, cypressdevelopmentcorp.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Bob Mackin. Bob, the Trudeau government, its ministers, the Prime Minister, kicking money off the back of buses and trucks like crazy, something like $7.7 billion over the last couple of weeks for programs, many of which wouldn't really happen until he had a third term. However, we haven't heard of any extra money to look after money laundering in British Columbia or anywhere else in the country that I'm aware of. Are you surprised by this?
Not really. There was a couple dozen announcements like that, photo ops across the country from Atlantic to Pacific, mostly in Liberal ridings, for funding announcements, grant announcements, running the gamut, economic development to environment and everything between. More events than could be covered by media. Of course, the government is using its own social media channels and is hoping that Liberal members will be the megaphones, because there just aren't enough media around anymore to cover all these announcements. And it seems like they're doing a strategy because they've learned from the case of the BC Liberals, you know, a coalition here in BC, Free Enterprise, of course, which includes many federal Liberals, but is not exclusively federal Liberal. They've learned the lesson of the BC Liberals in 2017, who lost power, and many of those who were running for the BC Liberals in 2017 said that what they heard at the doorsteps was that the government wasn't giving enough. The government wasn't doing enough spending announcements. Well, if you look what the Trudeau Liberals are doing, and they're in a dogfight to try to stay in power, they've learned that lesson, especially here in BC, and they've been doing announcement after announcement after announcement. A lot of these things were already in the budget, but they're re-announcing them, and they're re-announcing them with photo ops with various ministers that are fanning out across the country to promote the federal Liberal government, which is spending very liberally, making a lot of promises that they really can't afford to, because the deficit is about $19 billion into the next fiscal year, at a time when Trudeau actually years ago had promised a balanced budget. So they're trying to essentially buy our votes with our money. And they're not spending it the way that they should in certain circles. I mean, here in British Columbia, it's not easy for a lot of people to get by. Affordability is a major issue, and I don't think the federal Liberals have understood that British Columbians have a lot of bills to pay, prices have risen, and part of that is because of a lot of foreign money coming in here, and some of that foreign money is questionable, as the BC NDP government has discovered, and which has, of course, greenlit that money laundering public inquiry. And David Eby, when he was talking about the Hastings racecourse corruption this week, did mention that the promised help from the federal government hasn't really arrived yet to help crack down on money laundering and corruption here in BC. And that's rather disappointing, because the federal Liberals did include hundreds of millions of dollars in the budget earlier this year, but of course it's only been several months, and about 4 months since the budget, and they haven't really activated much of that money. They've got plans to spend that money over 3, 4, and 5 years, but haven't done anything immediately demonstrable to actually spend that money and put it into action and give us any results. They're late to the table. You know, the NDP got into power in 2017, and even before then, you know, the BC Liberals in 2016, they weren't really working fast enough, but they seemed to be telegraphing that they knew things were not all tickety-boo, because that's when they decided to open the joint gaming team, the Joint Intelligence Integrated Gaming Team, JIGIT, back in 2016, decided to fund that. And of course, when the NDP took over, they found out really what was going on behind the scenes, and it took until the 2019 budget for the federal Liberals to wake up and smell the coffee and promise to put more money into the RCMP and the CRA and other agencies. But, of course, they're not moving fast enough. And I think if you look at what's happening, compare the BC government approach with the federal Liberal approach, the BC government has greenlit a public inquiry to get to the bottom of this. And the federal Liberals don't seem to be moving fast enough, especially with the various models that are out there. Quebec had the Charbonneau Commission. Brazil has had Operation Car Wash. There's permanent anti-corruption squads in New York and in Hong Kong. We don't really have that infrastructure here in BC or in Canada. In BC, Attorney General David Eby wants to move in that direction and make that happen, but he's been calling on federal counterparts to be a partner in this, and here we are, days, if not a couple of weeks away from the election call, the actual election writ period for the October 21st election, and we've got Prime Minister Justin Trudeau being this celebrity politician going around the world with his fancy socks, but not caring much at all to crack down on corruption here in Canada. Of course, he's being dogged by the SNC-Lavalin scandal, and I think he's running out of time and probably run out of ideas, but he really doesn't care to really fund a fulsome attack on corruption in Canada. And you've got to ask yourself why. Why is that? Why doesn't a politician in power want to do that? Is it because he's been lobbied not to? Is there something else going on that we don't see? It's really odd because in this day and age, people want to know that their tax dollars are being spent wisely and properly, that the tax dollars are not enriching those who don't deserve it, and that people pay their fair share, as well as that people in society are not exploiting others. And we don't really see that on the federal level. We saw that Trudeau was at the G7 meeting in France and decided to write a $15 million check to help put out the forest fires in the Amazon in Brazil, which is a fine and noble idea. That kind of environmental degradation can have deleterious effects far beyond the borders of Brazil. But we're also talking about Brazil, which is one of the most corrupt countries in the world, a country that is still grappling with all the revelations of the Operation Car Wash prosecution, which continues. A country which is also grappling with massive amounts of crime and poverty. A country that didn't really fulfill its promises when it held the Olympics 3 years ago. I covered the Olympics in Rio, and they built some fine facilities, and they also renovated some fine facilities. But one thing they didn't get around to was actually giving the people of Rio de Janeiro proper water treatment and sewage. I lived for better part of a month, essentially beside open pits. Open pits near the Olympic park, open sewage pits. I had to cross one every day to get to the media center. And I got to leave Brazil, but the people that live there, that's their reality. And again, you bring that back to Canada, and Brazil is at least trying to do something about the corruption that is holding that country back. Our country is being held back, and some are doing things about corruption. David Eby here in British Columbia, but it doesn't really seem to be on the radar for Justin Trudeau and the federal Liberals. And I think that could definitely hurt them on their way to the polls on October 21st.
We'll have more with Bob Mackin right after this.
Avon Resources Limited is a gold exploration company with significant projects in British Columbia and the Yukon, trading on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol ABN, and the OTCQB, symbol ABNAF. Surrounded by world-class gold deposits and mines, Avon's 23,000 hectares Forest Kerr Gold Project is located in the heart of the Golden Triangle in northwestern BC. For more information, visit us at avonresources.com.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Bob Mackin. Bob, is there any more follow-up to the immigration raids at Hastings horse racing track in Vancouver?
Well, as you remember, on August 19th, the Customs Border Service Agency rounded up more than 24 people. There were more than 24 agents, plus Gaming Policy and Enforcement Branch agents, who executed a dawn raid at Hastings Racecourse and brought in a couple of dozen people. There were eventually only 7 people charged with immigration offenses, basically working in Canada without the proper permits. And they were processed through the Immigration and Refugee Board last week. 6 of them were people that didn't have papers to properly work. They were allowed into the country legally, but they weren't allowed to legally work here. They were working as grooms, and there was one other who did have his papers, but his papers were as a jockey. And you can get a work permit as a freelance jockey under Canadian law, but you can't get a work permit to be a groom. And a groom is someone that basically washes and cleans the horses in the stalls, feeds them, makes sure they're ready for a race, and after a race, makes sure they're ready to rest. To put it in a nutshell. And these workers were from Mexico, and they were rounded up and, of course, put through the Immigration Refugee Board, and they were, they're in the process of being sent home, and some of them agreed voluntarily to go home, and they admitted to the CBSA agents in the interviews what they were doing, basically working for $60, $70, $80 a day, 6-7 days a week, 5, 6, 7, 8 hours a day, for various trainers at Hastings Racecourse. And several of them said that they paid in the hundreds of dollars, if not low $1,000s, to a corrupt agent at the Gaming Policy Enforcement Branch who registered them, according to one of the CBSA agents, who registered these workers in the system as owners of horses, and then changed it after giving them their approval, then changed it to groom. So they were first classified as owners, and for some reason no one caught that. No one had common sense to say, wait a second, why all these owners of horses are being registered from Mexico? Mexico is not the richest of countries, and it's highly unusual to have Mexican owners at Hastings Racecourse. Many of the owners here are British Columbians, if not from other parts of Canada, sometimes from up and down the west coast of the U.S. So the varying types of people. One of them was someone who actually had experience in AutoCAD design, manufacturing, and actually managed people. But decided to work up in Canada, make some extra money. Another came to Canada for boxing events and wound up tending horses. There was a common thread among most of the 7 was that they never had experience before in minding horses. The one that did have the jockey visa, who wasn't a jockey here, who was a jockey in his homeland of Mexico, but not here, he'd been working since 2013 at Hastings Racecourse. And I found that very interesting. So he'd been getting that visa for quite that long, and supposedly had someone who vouched for him. We don't know who that is, who wrote a letter to the government to say that he was being a jockey when he actually wasn't. There was also one who had gang tattoos on his hand and behind his ears, and admitted to the CBSA agent that he had spent 3 months in jail in Mexico after being charged with robbery. He said he was innocent and not sentenced eventually, but oddly spent 3 months in jail and had some tattoos that the CBSA identified and matched with gang tattoos. So a real mix of people here, but David Eby had his news conference to say that he had his concerns going back to the days when he was in opposition, and that when he got into government, he found out more, and a whistleblower came to him last fall about Hastings Racecourse, and that at least one person who's on paid leave right now is under investigation. There could be more. CBSA is leading the investigation, but GPAB is assisting, and once CBSA has finished its work, according to David Eby, then GPAB, Gaming Policy Enforcement Branch, will pick up the reins and move this forward. So it's not over by a long shot, and there may be more than just one person. That's one person from GPAB who is suspended with pay. Meanwhile, these various grooms are being sent back to Mexico. They're the ones that are receiving the brunt of the consequences for now. But I think this investigation is going to tell us a lot more about what goes on in the business of horse racing at Hastings Racecourse.
If it weren't for the NDP government, do you think money laundering, corruption at casinos, and now this thing at the racetrack, funds being misappropriated or questionably spent at the legislature, would those things have come out under a Christy Clark government?
Oh, absolutely not. I think things would have gotten worse. And you know, this is what happens when you have one party in power for too long, not seeing the forest for the trees. Essentially, this could have been, you know, the foot on the other shoe, the shoe on the other foot, however you want to say it. If it had been the NDP for 16 years and the Liberals just came to power, the same dynamic would have happened. I don't think this is about ideology one way or another, but it's about a new set of eyes, a new, fresh set of eyes, a new set of fresh thinking, different people coming to see what is going on, what happened the last 16 years. Of course, there would be some motivation for them to try to sell this politically and say, well, the previous guys were so bad, you don't want to let them in power. We'll see more of that going forward as we get closer to the next election in 2021, if not sooner, sometime next year perhaps. But there is some truth to that the BC Liberals, who spent way too much time in power, let things slide and turned a blind eye to too many things and became really a pay-to-play kind of government. That there was no check and balance when it came to political donations, and that their ideology was to let people make as much money in a free enterprise fashion as possible, and not worry about the consequences. And I think that's troublesome and very problematic. But I also think that this might be perhaps a reason why British Columbia should seriously look at term limits. I mean, we have fixed election dates. Of course, that law can be amended if a government wants to go to the polls sooner. But we can thank Gordon Campbell in 2001 when he came to power with the BC Liberals then for instituting fixed election dates. Well, why don't we have some other checks and balances? Why don't we have term limits? Because if we had term limits, wouldn't have happened in the first place, or it would have been caught much sooner than this 2017 to 2019 era. I think that's something that really should be debated. We need some more electoral reform. We need some more transparency and openness. We need more checks and balances on those in power. We can't trust them to do their job all the time. But, we saw how power was abused. If you cited the legislature scandal in 2011, the Christy Clark Liberals were in the first few months of their time in power. Christy Clark won the leadership in March 2011. Well, in June 2011, the government decided, under her, party discipline, to give the job of clerk to Craig James without a competition. And the NDP opposed that at the time, and we saw now, 7-8 years later, what that meant, that Craig James retired in disgrace after being found in misconduct for all sorts of corrupt activities in the expense scandal and is under police investigation. That reflects negatively on the province, that reflects negatively on the government, and we shouldn't allow those things to happen. We should have better laws to prevent them from happening. And I think that's also what the NDP under John Horgan will eventually be judged upon, is it's not just good enough to clean things up, to have a public inquiry and to have some accountability, more accountability than before, and to uncover things that were being covered up before. What are they doing to enact checks and balances and new laws to prevent this from happening in the future? That's a big question that needs to be asked and answered as we get closer to the next election, because it's just not good enough to deal with the past. You got to deal with the future. And of course, if we bring it back to the first topic we're talking about today, is the situation of Tourism Minister Lisa Bear holding a news conference in Richmond, hosted at a gym that's run by someone who's being sued by the government because the government alleges he was a money launderer, a loan shark. You got to wonder if that was just a momentary lapse of thought by someone in the Horgan NDP, or if they're not carrying enough of the file as they should, or at least as they appear to be from a public relations standpoint.
Bob, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Thank you.
My guest has been award-winning investigative reporter and publisher of thebreaker.news, Bob Mackin. His website, thebreaker.ca. If you have any questions for Bob or any of our other guests, you can send them to info@howstreet.com. Find us on Twitter @TalkDigitalNet. Our popular YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. I'm Jim Goddard. Thank you for listening.
Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. The Goddard Report is available online and mobile at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. The Goddard Report is a production of Howe Street Media Incorporated.